Hello. Thought I'd do that one. I don't know. I want one of those, like, for those of you that are a little older. Well, never mind. Welcome back. I'm Brandon Cunningham. I am sharing the Bible with anyone who will listen. I'm learning with you. I hope you're reading ahead just so you can kind of understand what we're talking about. We've gone through the book of Genesis. Now we are in chapter 26 of Exodus. Wow, we're making some serious progress. Chapter 26 and 27 are important, but there's a lot of detail in them. And I don't think reading out loud in this format is really going to benefit you too much. So I'm going to kind of skip around and we're going to cover chapter 26 and 27 in one video. Are you ready? Here we go. In chapter 26, this is all about the direction, the instructions for building the tabernacle. And I'm going to read just a little bit because I want you to kind of get a sense of what we're talking about. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what the Hebrews thought when they heard all of this. In the complete Jewish Bible, it says, you are to make the tabernacle with 10 sheets of finely woven linen and with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. You are to make them with cherubim worked in, which is cherubim, that have been crafted by a skilled artisan. Each one is to be 42 feet long and 6 feet wide. All the sheets are to be the same size. 5 sheets are to be joined one to another, and the other 5 sheets are to be joined one to another. Make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost sheet in the first set, and do the same on the edge of the outermost sheet in the second set. Make 50 loops on the one sheet, and make 50 loops on the edge of the sheet in the second set. The loops are to be opposite one another. Some of these details, I know they get a little bit cloudy and they start to kind of make your head spin a little bit, but keep up for a second. You're to make a covering of the tent of tanned ram skins and an outer covering of fine leather. Do you know the difference between genuine leather and real leather? Genuine leather is the lowest quality of leather. Real leather is real leather. That's why so many cheap things can say genuine leather, because that's about as little leather as you can get. But they had to do all of this in the desert. If you've never been in the desert, imagine sewing and building and cutting and all of that stuff with linen. I mean, fine linen seems almost impossible. It's not like they had a sewing machine or some tables they could set up and kind of work with some, because in the desert, the dust is constant. It's in everything. So let's read a little bit more. For the second side of the tabernacle, I'm in verse 20. For the second side of the tabernacle to the north, make 20 planks, and there are 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under one plank and 2 under another. For the rear part of the tabernacle toward the west, make 6 planks. For the corners of the tabernacle in the rear, make 2 planks. These are to be double from the bottom all the way to the top, but joined at a single ring. Do the same for both of them. They are to form the 2 corners. And then we'll skip on down a little bit further and to verse 36. For the entrance to the tent, make a screen of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. It should be in colors, the work of a weaver. For the screen, make 5 posts of acacia wood, overlay them with gold, and cast them 5 sockets of bronze. Now, as you can imagine, sitting in my house with Walmart down the road and Lowe's down the road and access to videos on YouTube and all of that kind of stuff, I still couldn't do this. So imagine these people that were slaves have now been told, this is this amazing tent structure you're going to build, plus it's going to have to be built in a way that it can be taken apart and moved constantly for the next 40 years, at least. More than that, we know, but that's kind of the goal. And I just can't imagine getting those kind of instructions. But what's important is a number of things we want to note here. But one of the most important things is they were now being told exactly what God wanted. And they had the choice. Do I really want to be a part of this? Am I really going to put forth some effort and make this happen. I've been at churches where we've just put out a call and said, hey, we need people to set up chairs or to move chairs. And people are like, nah, that's too hard. I don't want to do that. I've been at churches where if it rained, people didn't come. It was too cold, too hot, too wet, too windy, too dry, whatever it was. These people put the effort in because that's what God said he wanted. He also wants us to put effort in. He doesn't want us to build a tabernacle. I'm not saying that. But the tabernacle had 3 zones. The Holy of Holies was the greatest. And then the holy place was a little less holy. And then the outer court, the least. It had to be rugged enough to move. You know, for those of us who have the canopies we use on the beach sometimes, you know, you take those things down about 5-10 times and they break and you can't use them anymore. So this had to be built really, really well. And it couldn't be so heavy they couldn't carry it. So these are all things they had to figure out. They used bronze in the outer area where humanity can enter. That's the least holy part. The tent, the sanctuary, was about 45 feet long, 15 feet wide, and 15 feet high. It was divided into 2 rooms. The holy place was larger, and then the Holy of Holies was smaller because obviously couldn't go in there except the high priest. So it's believed that the covering was either seal or porpoise skins to be water repellent and offer some protection against the sun and the dust of the desert life. Now, they were near the Red Sea, so both of those creatures were there. They could have used either one of those. But I find it just fascinating that they had so much work to do and they still did it because they followed what God wanted. And I'm not criticizing anybody except myself. I think as a Christ follower, I've gotten really lazy and comfortable in some of the things I'm willing to do for God. Even the stuff that he is very clearly asking us to do, genuinely, my response has been too often, that's too hard. This is too hard. To read the Bible to people and to teach and to study and put all this effort into a 15, 20-minute video, it takes me probably a couple of hours per video to get all of this, but it's worth it because God told me to do it. So I'm going to do it. It's not about my pleasure. It's not about my comfort. It's about him and his will. And so that's what I'm trying to do. So now let's jump over to Exodus chapter 27. And again, we have a lot of details. So I'm going to cover a few. It is important. I recommend you read it, but reading it out loud is probably not going to serve our purposes too much here. So read it for yourselves. Let's jump right in. You are to make the altar of acacia wood, 7.5 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. The altar is to be square and 4.5 feet high. Those of you that can build things, that's huge. Make horns for it on its 4 corners. The horns are to be one piece with it, and you are to overlay it with bronze. So not only do you need to build this really big altar, but you need to build the horns into it out of a single piece of wood. That takes some effort. So make its pots for removing ashes, and its shovels, basins, meat hooks, and fire pans. All its utensils are to be made of bronze. Make for it a grate of bronze netting, and on the 4 corners of the netting, make 4 bronze rings. Put it under the rim of the altar so that the netting reaches halfway up the altar. What's really key here is they didn't go to Walmart and buy any of this stuff. They didn't trade for any of this stuff, even though they probably could have. God said, make the pots and the utensils, make everything you need. I don't want anything in this tabernacle that was created by somebody else. I want my people to create it. So let's jump on down to verse 16. For the gateway of the courtyard, there is to be a screen 30 feet made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. It should be in colors, the work of a weaver. It is to be on 4 posts in 4 sockets. All of the posts all the way around the courtyard are to be banded with silver and in stands of sockets of bronze. The length of the courtyard is to be 150 feet and the width 75 feet everywhere, with the height 7.5 feet. The tapestries and the screen are to be finely woven linen, and the sockets are to be bronze. All the equipment needed for every kind of service in the tabernacle, as well as the tent pegs for the tabernacle and for the courtyard, are to be of bronze. You are to order the people of Israel to bring you pure oil of pounded olives for the light, and keep a lamp burning continually. Aaron and his sons are to put it in the tent of meeting outside the curtain in front of the testimony, and keep it burning from evening until morning before Adonai. This is to be a permanent regulation through all your generations of the people of Israel. So the ark was the most holy item inside the tent because it had all the things that God told them to put into it. The brazen altar was the most holy item outside. Brazen just means that it's made from the hardest metal they have, which was bronze. It's a mix of iron and copper. Altar of sacrifice, altar burnt offering, brazen altar, all these things mean the same thing. They're just different way of saying it. The altar was a fire pit, basically, constructed with acacia wood and covered with bronze. It was 7.5 feet long and 5 feet high. 4 horns were molded into each corner. These horns were used to tie the animals during the sacrifice procedure. Because imagine you bring a bull to the altar. He's not going to just stand there while you go through your process. You're going to have to tie him up. The altar was inside the gate of the outer court. And God had him place it outside the holy area because of the stone fence. Beyond the stone fence. The placement of the altar is significant. And I would say Google the tabernacle and you'll kind of see some of this stuff. There's a few films out there you can watch too. It's not real relevant that you understand all of this, but there is a purpose to all of it. And we're going to get into some of that in the festivals and especially Leviticus. But you had to pass by the altar to get to the sanctuary. This is important. Each time a priest entered the sanctuary, he had to make a sacrifice. This is prophetic of the purpose of Yeshua, Jesus the Christ. We have to go through the sacrifice of Christ, that's our sacrifice, in order to enter the sanctuary of God. Our ability to approach God is through Jesus' sacrifice. It's the same process they used then. So the cross was to Christ as the brazen altar was to these sacrificial animals. It's the same basic thing. The animals had to be raised up to the altar, bound to the horns of the altar, and have their blood spilled to atone for Israel's sin. Christ had to be raised up, bound to the cross, and his blood spilt to atone for our sins. It's the same thing. These are patterns that God's showing us. The Jew that kept to this heavenly ideal, according to Paul, everybody's favorite disciple, is the one who accepted the Messiah. So what Paul says is the one that really did what this all showed, what all this shadowed, was the one who accepted the Messiah's sacrifice. So if you took, say, a frog into the brazen altar to sacrifice, that would not be accepted in order to get to God. Just like a really good pastor or a really good book or a really good sacrifice to you or to anybody else wouldn't satisfy this requirement. It has to be the perfect sacrifice, has to be Jesus. That's the only way in. That's why he's the way, not just the best way or one of the ways. So the Father chooses to see us free of sin. He sees us as justified. We are reminded again and again in the Bible of what a debt of gratitude we owe Israel. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know about any of this stuff. Did you ever think about that? The only reason we know is because people left Israel and told us about it. Otherwise, we would have never knew any of this stuff. So read through Romans 9, 10, and 11, and one right after the other. Ignore the chapter markers, and this kind of fits into that. And remember, Romans is just one long letter. We put in all the chapters and verses and stuff, the markers, to make it easier for us to remember and to cite. mainly because we didn't want to memorize the whole thing. Back then they did, and then you could just quote a little bit of scripture and everybody knew what you were talking about. But we don't really do that anymore, sadly. Take it all at face value, just as it's intended, and it'll make the spiritual grafting process of Gentiles into the covenants of Israel clear. It'll mean way more to you. I'm not going to read those 3 chapters right now because I think that I want you to do that on your own. So remember, these animal deaths, these sacrifices, they were noisy and messy and smelled. If you've ever been on a farm, that smells great compared to what this was. They were screaming and hollering and trying to get out of there, and animals in general don't smell too good. So those who brought their animals either had to do the deed themselves or with the priest. We don't really do that anymore. If we have to do anything more than put a check in the box or slip a little cash in, we got to walk all the way over there to do it, or use an app or something. We say, oh, that's too hard, I'm not going to give. People had to bring their own sacrifices back then. It wasn't as easy as just giving a little bit of cash or time or energy. So the last verse says the menorah is to be a permanent regulation. The temple's going to be rebuilt, and that menorah is going to burn again. We're going to see that in the millennial kingdom. So these are all shadows and patterns of what's to come. And when you know it, it makes the New Testament just open up and come alive and mean so much more. So that's chapter 26 and 27 of Exodus. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you share this. Tell somebody about it. Maybe impress them with your new Bible knowledge, that you know a few things. So God bless. Don't forget, love God, love people, and change the world.